All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakathu. So, insha'Allah, today I wanted to have some reflections on the idea of sabr and hamd and shukr and thankfulness. And so I want to begin with a sample or an ayah from the Quran in Surah Al-Kahf. And it's the story of Musa and Khidr. And it comes right after Musa has asked Khidr to be able to join him, to travel with him in order to learn from him. And he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Khidr responds now to Musa's request and says, قال إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا وكيف تصبر على ما لم تحط به خبرا. Says, you will never be able to be patient with me. For how could you be patient about things of which you have no knowledge or comprehension of the experience? And so I want to now jump back real quick. When we heard about the virus and about the quarantine and about the circumstances that were then going to affect us, how many of us had a first response of saying, Alhamdulillah? Alhamdulillah, there's the quarantine. Alhamdulillah, I can't go out. Alhamdulillah, I have to stay home and can't go to my work. Alhamdulillah, I got laid off. Alhamdulillah, that I now have whatever challenges this particular situation is facing me with. Because we know that patience, that sabr, comes at the time of calamity. It's at that moment of difficulty and hardship that we are most faced with, that we're most required to have that attitude and response of sabr, of patience, and ultimately of gratitude. The Prophet ﷺ had said that patience comes at the time of calamity. This was an incident when he was walking by a woman who was at a grave. She was weeping and crying. She had just lost someone very beloved to her. So she's bent over, she's crying, and as the Prophet ﷺ is walking by, he pauses and tells her, have sabr. And she doesn't recognize or see who it is that's talking to her. She's caught up in her grief, and her response to him is, you don't know what I'm going through, right? And continues to cry. And the Prophet ﷺ simply moves on. Afterwards, somebody who saw this incident comes to the woman and says, don't you know who that was behind you? That was the Prophet, ﷺ. So afterwards, she goes to the Prophet feeling very apologetic and sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't realize who it was. And he told her, patience is at the time of calamity. In other words, it's in that moment that we really need to have patience. It's easier to look back on a hard incident from 5 years ago or 20 years ago and say, yeah, no, that was hard, but alhamdulillah. But it's in that moment that we need to reflect and have patience. And that comes out of a space of understanding another hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ said, all the affairs of the believer are good, but this is only true for the believer. When something good happens to him, he is grateful, and that is good for him. And when something bad happens to him, he is patient, and that is good for him. Now, again, I want us to think about what was our response. We might be saying now, at least inshallah at this point now, we're saying alhamdulillah, if we didn't say it then. But really, it's in that moment of tribulation that we want to say, alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah that this has happened. And we say that whether or not we understand why something is beneficial for us. This now takes us back again to the ayahs that I opened with. Because this beautiful story that Allah reveals to us in the Quran between Musa and Khidr is just that. If we aren't familiar with the story, I'll give you a quick synopsis, but please do go back and read, ideally, all of Surah Al-Kahf. So it's chapter 18 of the Quran. We're recommended to read that every Friday. So read it in a language that you understand well. But this story of Musa and Khidr, so it takes place between ayahs about 60 and 75 in the surah. And it's telling us of an instance where, and we know also from the hadith here, so I'll embellish just a little bit from the hadith, where a man came to Prophet Musa, and this was supposedly during the early part of his prophethood, and he asked him, who is the most knowledgeable person? And Musa said, I am, not out of any arrogance or anything, but simply out of a space of, he knew he was the prophet of Allah. He had been given the law and the knowledge and so forth. And so coming and being asked this question, he thought it was himself. Now, as we know, the prophets are always given the most challenging of tests or the most difficult of tests, and they're also given the least leeway. So any small, tiny mistake or error that they would make, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately corrects them in this. So the correct answer, of course, would have been Allah knows best. So Allah revealed to him in that moment, no, there is another servant of mine who has more knowledge. And Prophet Musa alayhi salam, mashallah, his response, immediate response was, who is this person? Where is he? Because I want to go and learn from him. I want to go and study with this servant, right? It was immediate response of humility and of being humble and being a seeker of knowledge. So he wanted to know, who is this servant of yours? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him that you go until you find the joining of the two seas, and you'll see a sign from me, and then you'll know, you'll meet my servant there. So Musa tells his servant, let us go, and no matter how long it takes for us to travel, we will go and we will find this servant. And again, there's a lesson in us for this idea of what we should be willing to do to seek out knowledge and to learn and to educate ourselves. So they go and they travel for a while. They come to the joining of the seas. Musa alayhi salam takes a nap, and then while he's sleeping, the servant is up for a little bit, and he sees their salted fish jump out of the basket and tunnel into the ocean. And the servant then sleeps, thinking he'll tell Musa in the morning. In the morning he forgets. They travel on a little farther, and then the evening comes. He's asked, where's Musa alayhi salam? Says to the servant, bring the fish so that we can eat. And he says, oh, I forgot. Shaitan made me forget, but while we were back at our last stop, the fish jumped out of the basket and tunneled in. Musa alayhi salam said, that was the sign we were looking for. They go back and they find Khidr. Now, Musa alayhi salam says to him, I would like to come and study with you. I would like to come and travel with you so that I might learn from you. And as I said in the beginning of the talk, Khidr responds to him by saying, you will not be able to be patient with me. You will not be able to stay patient. And then he follows it up, because he's not telling Musa, oh, you're an impatient man and so forth, but rather he explains to him and says, how is it that you can be patient over that of which you have no knowledge? And now Musa continues on to say, that look, insha'Allah, you're going to find me patient, right? You're going to find that I'm going to be patient with you, and I'm not going to disobey you. So that you tell me, you lay down the ground rules. Whatever you say, I'm going to go with that, and I'll be patient, insha'Allah. So he says to him, okay, fine, but don't ask me about anything that I do. And then the story, continues, and we hear about the boat that the Khidr scuttles when the orphans give them a ride across the river, the young boy that Khidr kills, and the village that's extremely inhospitable and rude and insulting to them, and yet Khidr rebuilds a wall that's falling on the village. And in each of these instances, Musa alayhi salam says something because he can't contain himself. He's seeing something that is wicked or evil, and just he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand it, and he can't help but say something to Khidr. And so after the 3 times, and Khidr says, okay, that's it. We can't travel anymore. You had your 3 chances, and we have to part ways. But he explains to them at each point, here's why I did those things. So if you don't know, look to the Quran, and the answer is explained as to why he does each of those things. My point in all of this for us, the lesson is that with these things, we are given a glimpse, a tiny glimpse of the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That veil is lifted just a little bit on these 3 stories, where we're given an understanding of why some things happen that are ultimately best, even though the people involved in those stories didn't understand it. The boys and who had the boat, they didn't understand why this person that they knew, who they had, given a free ride to, their only way of earning a living is ferrying people back and forth. They didn't know why would this person, we've just done something nice for them. We knew him from before and he was a nice guy, and he's putting a hole in our boat. They didn't understand it, and Khidr didn't explain it. He just did it, and then they went on their way. The parents of the young boy that was killed, as far as they knew, their child didn't come home. They went out looking to see that evening perhaps, or that afternoon, where is our child? And they find that he's been murdered on the side of the road. And you can just imagine the distress that they were in when they find their child this way, having no understanding of why this would happen to their innocent young child. And the people in the village might have thought, great, some suckers gave us free labor and they rebuilt a wall. And years down the road, when the orphans were to come and find their treasure, may not have even been aware that someone else came along and rebuilt the wall. So each of these instances, that the people in the story that were directly affected, they had no idea. And that's our reality. When things happen in our life, when there's some difficulty or tribulation that happens, we don't have an awareness. We don't have any specific knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about why certain things happen. But what we're realizing, or that the awareness that we're granted, if you will, in this story, is that in each case, had the people known about the reasoning why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did it, they would have chosen that reason. They would have chosen that reason. Now, sometimes people I know struggle with the question around, well, oh, surely the parents of the young boy that was killed, because he was maybe 5 years old or so, just very, very young, they would never have chosen that. But the reality is, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that he was going to grow to be a wicked person. And as parents, the one thing I guarantee every parent wants for their child is goodness. Right? No parent wants evil for their children. No parent wants their children to suffer and be in torment. And so as parents, even if we knew that the choice was either your child dies when they're 5 years old and then they enter Jannah because young children are innocent, or they grow to adulthood, but they're going to be an evil person, and because of that evil, they're going to end up in the hellfire. Every parent would choose, ultimately, I'd rather suffer the loss of my child now and know they're in Jannah than know that, oh, they grew up and they had some nice years maybe when they were young, but then they became evil and they became a burden on me and they were, horrendous to me, and they ultimately end up in the hellfire. So this now takes us back to the hadith. All the affairs of the believer are good. Because as a believer, our faith and trust is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when something comes that's hard for us, right, no matter what that challenge is, and what's hard for us is different. Different people have different challenges. They struggle with different things. So maybe it's financial difficulty. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's our business has been ruined. Maybe we have some, whatever that hardship is. And different people struggle with different things. But whatever we find difficult to take, if we approach it with sabr, with this idea of just, Ya Allah, I know that whatever comes, it comes because you know that that's best for me. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Maybe I can't even imagine what the possible benefit could be, right? Maybe I have, we have a righteous person in our family and they're benefiting, helping everybody, and then they die. And we say, Ya Allah, they were a good person and they were benefiting everybody. And I can't imagine how is it beneficial that they died now at this point. Okay, our inability to understand doesn't change the fact that if we had the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would have also said, oh, now I get it. Okay, alhamdulillah, I'm glad they died. Right? Because why? Because Allah knows best. And that's the wisdom of these stories. When the Prophet ﷺ was talking about these ayahs to his Sahaba, he had said, I wish that Musa alayhi salam had been able to be more patient so we could have learned more lessons. And indeed, as we see these things, it starts to give us a glimpse into that divine plan, if you will. And so I want us to think about, again, ourselves. What was our response to this hardship? And if it wasn't in the moment, at least insha'Allah, I want it for us to be now, alhamdulillah. And hopefully we're realizing some benefit. You know, a lot of the families that I've talked with have said they're able to spend more time with their family now. They're able to spend more time praying, more time reading Quran, getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so there's been a lot of growth in positive things. Yes, there has certainly been some hardship for many of us. Finances for many of us have been difficult. Many of us may have been laid off or had restricted work hours, or maybe we've had to go on unemployment and we're, you know, getting less income and we were hardly making it before. You know, there may be some illnesses in our family, and there have been several families that have been afflicted with the virus, and some of them have lost family members now because of the virus. So certainly we've seen hardships coming, but in all of them, I want us to really get in that mindset of saying, alhamdulillah. Whether I understand it, can possibly think of some possible benefit, or am completely at a loss for where the good is or where the benefit is, as believers, I want to say, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah for everything as it's happening. I try my best. I'm gonna do my best to make the best of the situation, but I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen what's best for me. I know that He has decided a path that will ultimately yield things to be in the best interest for myself, even though I don't understand it, even though I may not get it. And even I may think I get it. I may think, oh, okay, I'm seeing the good. I see where the benefit is. Okay, alhamdulillah. There may be even greater benefit that we have no comprehension of yet. But our trust is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He gives us the example in Surah Al-Kahf where we have a chance to get a glimpse of some of the wisdom, some of the reasoning behind things. And there are things beyond that Allah knows best and we don't know. So I'll conclude just with one short story about a couple. They were a very poor couple. The man was a fisherman, and they lived in a small hut by the sea. And every day the man would go out and fish and barely catch enough to be able to feed his family and sell just a tiny bit to meet their other essentials. And their whole life they would make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, him and his wife, that Allah would give them an increase in provision. And yet they lived their whole life extremely poor and died in that state of being poor. On the Day of Judgment, when that couple is raised, they see this tremendous amount, this mountain range's worth, if you will, of good deeds in hasanah. And they're really impressed, like, wow, look at all of those good deeds. So there must be some incredible person who earned all of that. And they ask about that good deeds, and they say, who does that belong to? And their answer, those are your good deeds. And they're both in kind of bewilderment, say, but we didn't do all of that. We just barely eked out a living. And they're told that every time you made dua and asked Allah for an increase in provision in dunya, instead of Allah giving it to you in dunya, He was saving it up for you and multiplying it. And so now you find it all here. And upon hearing that, the couple says, Ya Allah, why did you give us anything in dunya? We would rather have everything I've saved up. And subhanAllah, think about that. They barely had enough to live. And in that moment, when they realized the reality of things, they're like, you know what? We probably could have done with a little bit less in dunya, and we would rather have it saved up here. This is that space for us to be in, to know that, you know, we don't ask Allah to deprive us. We're told that the believer says, Allahumma atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhaban nar. Oh Allah, give us the good of this life and the good of the hereafter, and save us from the hellfire. So I don't want anybody asking Allah to take away from the good of this life and only give them in the hereafter. But the point is that whatever Allah is saving for us of the hereafter, and whatever good we have because we're patient with the hardships and difficulties that we have now, we will be overjoyed on the Day of Judgment when we find what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has saved for us. So insha'Allah, let us make dua for each other, that we have sabr, that we have the ability to remain patient, and that Allah keep our feet firmly fixed upon the straight path, and that He does not let our hearts become deviated after He has guided us, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to use this time to be reflective, to draw closer to Him, to draw closer to our family members, to make this a time of goodness between us. If we've had any kind of bad blood with any friends or family, that we use this time to maybe, insha'Allah, draw closer. Even if we have social distancing, that we reach out, that we cleanse our hearts, that we make good dua for each other, and that we ultimately have this as a time of highlight for us in our akhirah. When we look back and we see that maybe this time period, when we had sabr, we had patience, we were hoping for that good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hoping for the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for following through and abiding by the rules of quarantine and pandemic in the lands that we're in, that these things become a means of us achieving Jannat al-Firdaus. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakathu.